Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us. I'm Peter Husey. I'm Director of Strategic Deterrent Studies at the Air Force's AFA's Mitchell Institute. On behalf of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies and our partners, the Advanced Nuclear Weapons Alliance Deterrent Center, we welcome you to this forum on nuclear weapons complex modernization, the cornerstone of our strategic nuclear deterrent. We created this seminar series on National Nuclear Security Administration issues with the great help of our colleagues in the NNSA community and with the encouragement of many of you in the nuclear industry. And it complements the Nuclear BMD and Space Power Speaker Series we have hosted since 1983 and 2014, respectively. As General Hyten has cautioned, the current nuclear modernization requirements of the United States will span at least 2 more decades of heavy lifting until the last Columbia-class submarine is placed in the Boomer fleet in 2042. In that regard, we should be also mindful that 2 of our nuclear colleagues, Mark Schneider and Jim Howe, have written on how the Russians can deploy upwards of 4,400 strategic nuclear weapons simply with the force structure they now have under the New START Treaty, some of which is accountable and some of which is not. The United States, on the other hand, has a limited edge capability and is seeking to expand our pit production to at least 80 per year. We should also be mindful of the fact that there's been no U.S. deployment of modernized nuclear assets in terms of bombers, submarines, or ICBMs since the last B-2 bomber in 1996 was terminated, and the first nuclear capable B-21 is planned for an IOC of 2029. It's a period of 33 years, all of which is illustrated on page 9 of the 2020 OSD Nuclear Handbook. And General Aronsack said, we did indeed take a nuclear procurement holiday. Now, to help us get back on track and better inform the nuclear community about NNSA issues, we kicked off this series in January when we heard from the administrator, Lisa Gordon-Haggerty. In May, we featured Drew Walter from OSD, and we have 3 additional events planned for the remainder of this year. Today, we are very pleased to host Dr. Charles Verdon, who's the NNSA's Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs. In this role, he leads the team that directs the Stockpile Stewardship Program, which is responsible for maintaining the U.S. nuclear weapons stockpile. And only NNSA can do this job, especially as we need to modernize our nuclear weapons stockpile and recapitalize it, and especially its supporting infrastructure, which has reached a tipping point. We either go forward or we don't. Thus, I want to thank you, Dr. Verdon, for being so gracious with your time to join us this afternoon. I look forward to your remarks, and I particularly want to thank Joel Spangenberg and his colleagues from NNSA, and of course, my partners at ANWA, and all those who have helped support the series. With that, I am delighted to turn the session back over to my friends Jeff and David of ANWA and to our speaker for today.
Okay, Peter, thanks very much. I'm going to take the liberty of sharing my screen. Okay. Well, again, thank you, Peter. And it's no secret, from many of you who know Peter on this call, that he's been a steadfast supporter in pursuit of ensuring a robust U.S. strategic nuclear deterrent, protect America and our global allies. And we sincerely thank you and, of course, the Mitchell Institute for our partnership on these NNSA forums. Thanks to all of you for joining us today for our NNSA forum with Dr. Verdon. I'm Jeff Crater. We're pleased that over 200 of you signed up to join us. Hope you all will be able to get on. From the Congress, from DOD and NNSA, from the think tank community, to the media and in our industry that supports these efforts. Our forum today is being recorded and is open to the press. We encourage questions. In case you want to remain anonymous for your questions, you can take advantage of the Q&A function on Zoom. I'm joined today with my colleague, David Charrington, who will moderate the Q&A portion. Dave and I co-founded the Advanced Nuclear Weapons Alliance and Associated Deterrent Center Forums as a bipartisan environment to educate the public and interested parties about the key issues around modernization of our nation's strategic nuclear deterrent. We're pleased, again, to partner with the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies to bring you this third in a six-part series on NNSA. As we do for all our forums, we offer a brief primer on why it's important to maintain and modernize our strategic nuclear deterrent. So it's particularly important in this age of information, and unfortunately, in some cases, disinformation, to make sure each of us do the research and really educate ourselves by seeking a wide variety of sources on the rationale for deterrence, and to pay attention to what our friends, and particularly our foes overseas, are doing to modernize their deterrent. It all begins and ends in NNSA, the cornerstone of our strategic nuclear deterrent, with its nuclear weapons complex across our national laboratories and manufacturing facilities, suppliers, and of course, critical universities. It's important that we continue to modernize this consolidated NNSA defense program's infrastructure that's emerged from the massive Cold War complex, or if we don't, we begin to chip away and weaken our deterrent. The more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. That's what Admiral Rickover, the father of the nuclear navy, said in a 1983 speech, which I think helps capture the essence of strategic nuclear deterrence. This was a time in our nation's and world history when tens of millions of people died because we lacked an overarching deterrent. That time period was World War II. 70 million people perished in the worst atrocity in human history. Some estimate as high as 150 million. Our strategic nuclear deterrent prevents tens of millions more from death. In other words, World War III. Our deterrent stood us well during the Cold War, and it's evolved in the last 30 years since the end of the Cold War buildup. In those remarkable words, President Reagan, standing before the Berlin Wall in 1987, said, "President Gorbachev, tear down this wall." The wall collapses in '89, and by 1991, the Soviet Union collapses into autonomous republics, ending the Cold War. In the United States, deterrence personnel were downsized, production, delivery systems, and nuclear weapons production halted, including nuclear weapons materials like highly enriched uranium and plutonium ordered by President H.W. Bush on July 13, 1992. This sealed the fate of plutonium pit manufacturing at the Rocky Flats plant in Colorado. Cold War downsizing under H.W. Bush went forward under Clinton. We can see what the Rocky Flats plant looked like in 1985 in the slide compared to its cleanup end state in 2005. This shuttered plutonium manufacturing capability was moved to Los Alamos, and now we're working to reconstitute and construct a modern plutonium pit manufacturing facility at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. Moving out from the peaceful and prosperous 1990s, then 9/11 happened. Terrorism hit the United States and the nation mourned. The counterterrorism and military buildup started overseas. Deterrence modernization was put on the back burner. And so it goes, while America and our allies fight global terrorism, and rightly so, China and Russia modernize their nuclear forces. Hence what Peter was talking about, General Herentsack's nuclear procurement holiday. Starting under the Obama administration, doubling down under Trump, and with the bipartisan support of Congress, we've stopped kicking the can on strategic nuclear deterrence modernization. We're in a 30-year, $1.2 trillion trajectory to maintain and modernize our deterrent, replacing B-2s by continuing to fly B-52s with air-launched cruise missiles and the future long-range standoff missile, because B-52s, of course, lack stealth. We'll replace both with new stealthy B-21s starting in the 2030 timeframe, running through the 2050 timeframe. Plus, we're adding nuclear-capable F-35s. On land, we'll be replacing the Minuteman III with a new ground-based strategic deterrent, or GBSD, and modern ICBMs. At sea, 14 Ohio-class submarines with 12 Columbias with upgraded Trident II D5 missiles. NNSA has been modernizing throughout the decade, But much more needs to be done at the weapons plants and national laboratories to maintain, in many cases, restore our capability, restore what we've let atrophy since the wall fell, that is to manufacture nuclear materials and the warheads themselves. So this is the consolidated nuclear weapons complex today. This is a map courtesy of our Congressional Research Service, stretching across the lower 48, west to east. We've got the national laboratories at Lawrence Livermore and Sandia in California, Los Alamos and the main Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico. Of course, we have the Nevada National Security Site, which I grew up known as the test site, but this is a facility that must stand ready to test should the need arise. We rely on our laboratories and extensive science-based stockpile stewardship through inertial confinement fusion and computer modeling, avoiding underground tests. Los Alamos has been the default pit manufacturing facility, as I mentioned previously, but we're gearing up to have manufacturing in Savannah River, which also has an existing tritium mission. Kansas City National Security Campus focuses on the non-nuclear components, and at Y-12 in Tennessee is the center of HEU manufacturing, highly enriched uranium manufacturing, and other strategic materials. And then I'd say often not recognized, but the Pacific Northwest National Lab and Oak Ridge National Lab play critical roles in reconstituting our strategic materials. All these manufacturing facilities feed the Pantex plant in Amarillo, Texas, where weapons are assembled, disassembled, and surveilled to ensure they work as they age, with close engagement, again, by our national laboratories. So with the backdrop on this sunrise slide of the sky cranes over Y-12 in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and the new uranium processing facility going up, I'd like to welcome Dr. Verdon, Deputy Administrator for Defense Programs at NNSA, for his remarks on the nuclear weapons complex modernization, the cornerstone of our strategic nuclear deterrent. Dr. Verdon.
Okay, so very good. So good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here, or I guess I should say more properly, virtually here. I think we're learning how to do this over this strange period we find ourselves in. So I think it was aptly introduced. My goal today is to talk about how the NNSA defense program, its ongoing work to modernize the nuclear weapons complex. As I say, the nuclear weapons complex or nuclear weapons enterprise, by this I do mean across the board in terms of our production facilities, our scientific capabilities, and our workforce. But I will concentrate a lot today more on the production infrastructure. And as I say, it's while nowhere near the size of the Cold War complex, it's still a big complex that I'll talk about a little bit more in the context of the modernization program. I also will recognize that modernizing the weapons complex is complicated. I will try to simplify it to the extent that I can, but there are a lot of moving parts to this effort that we're doing, because we are trying to make up, as was introduced, for a lot of time where maybe not the complete attention was paid to the infrastructure. And now we're running out of, as others have pointed out, we're running out of runway, and we have to move quickly in order to not impact our deterrent. So as was, I think, is introduced, it's the importance of having nuclear weapons and signaling their possession has long been recognized as a cornerstone of the nuclear deterrent. But perhaps less well understood and remembered is actually the infrastructure itself, the facilities, capability, and personnel that maintain and replace them as required is also directly provides an important deterrent effect. In fact, a lot of discussions after the Iron Curtain came down with the Soviet Union, it was clear that they were well cognizant of our capabilities. And so it does play an important role in deterrence, and that aspect of it has somewhat been forgotten. Everyone thinks about the pointy little objects, and they certainly are important, but how you take care of them is also key. So to step back a little bit, if you go back to the start of the stewardship program, the key scientific, engineering, and production questions that faced the stewardship program at its inception was the development of the underpinning understanding and capabilities necessary to maintain confidence in the safety, security, and effectiveness of the legacy stockpile without reliance on additional explosive nuclear testing. I think demonstrable evidence shows that the stewardship program has succeeded in carrying out that task. But having said that, since the end of the Cold War, the global nuclear deterrent landscape has not evolved as we anticipated. Our peer competitors are modernizing and extending their stockpiles. They're also competing aggressively in relevant science, technology, and engineering areas. And they do possess production capabilities and capacities that exceed our production enterprise today. And so that's kind of the backdrop now, which we have to make up for lost time. So what we're looking at is, in this environment, what our goal is to support the U.S. ability to build upon the successes of the 1990 Euro Stewardship Program and advance the NNSA National Security Enterprise or Complex to become more responsive and resilient. And what I mean by responsive and resilient is responsive is to be able to respond to external events, resilient being able to respond to internal unplanned events, but to be able to do all of those on a time scale that don't put the deterrent at risk. So we need to move our complex to become more responsive and resilient while we also are delivering for the DoD to meet their requirements. So, if I step back and say, okay, what are we doing to establish a more responsive and resilient production enterprise? NNSA has embarked on implementing this new complex. We've established a vision and a strategy, and we're executing the plans. We have plans that run from today all the way out to 30 plus years. We recognize that it's taken decades to get us into this state and that we find ourselves in, and it will take us decades to recover. We also recognize that while we're modernizing the infrastructure, we must continue to meet DoD warhead requirements. So some people have likened this as changing the car tires as the car is driving down the road. Maybe a more apt is I think, what is it, a Mercedes commercial where they're actually changing the engine as the car is going down the road. So it's a significant challenge that we're balancing. And yet, we believe we have well-reviewed plans in place that will enable us to do this. We review them constantly and work with our DoD colleagues closely to make sure that they're well aware and well synchronized with what we're doing. So, what we've done is we've taken, as most would do, we've taken a risk-informed approach to identify the priorities of which we address the facilities. We are focused on the facilities that are at the highest risks to delivering for the stockpile, and also focusing on facilities for which we have concerns for workforce safety. Some of our facilities have atrophied to the state that they're difficult to work in. So those are the priorities that we placed on our modernization right now. And so let me just step back a little bit to put it also in the context of the total infrastructure of NNSA. NNSA is its own industrial base to a large extent, and that's probably a good thing. We don't want too many people that know how to make nuclear weapons. So we are pretty much our own industrial base. We're not as big, as I mentioned, we're not as big as we were during the Cold War, but the land or the square miles that we cover as a complex is about the size of Delaware. We have 50,000 employees. We have over 2,000 miles of roads. We have, many facilities. We have to take care of those facilities. We're the landlord predominantly of these sites. So when I talk about infrastructure and I talk about modernizing infrastructure, it's not only the infrastructure, say, of the production facility that we're focused on. We also have to think about the infrastructure of where the workforce that's coming in going to have offices. Where are they going to park? Where we have to worry about all of that because we are the landlords of all of those capabilities. So we have to factor those in as we talk about the modernization. We have to distinctly think about what is the increased workforce at the site going to be, and how do we make sure that they're properly taken care of at their sites. So, and then just as some quick numbers, there's different numbers that float around, but you get roughly 40% of our buildings or 40% of our facilities are older than 60 years. In fact, some of our key facilities date back to the Manhattan Project. So that kind of gives you a context of which we're having to, recapitalize a lot of these facilities because they have gotten quite old. We do proactive maintenance on these facilities because they are still key to the enterprise. But you reach a point to where you know that you have to replace them because you can't put enough maintenance into them. So that's again part of what went into the risk assessment when we identified which facilities we needed to replace. So we are executing an extensive near-term effort to renew and also reestablish critical manufacturing capabilities. That's also part of the modernization, is that some key manufacturing capabilities that we had have also atrophied, and we have to be able to restand those up. They weren't required during the early part of the stewardship program, but they are required now. So it's not only the facilities and the capabilities in those facilities, but also within existing facilities, reestablishing certain production capabilities in particular that we no longer have. So if you look at the broad context of what we're doing, we're renewing high explosive production and science capabilities at Pantex. We're establishing facilities and capabilities to meet the needs of tritium at the Savannah River site in South Carolina. As was mentioned, we're reestablishing pit production utilizing the preferred two-site solution of 30 pits per year at Los Alamos National Laboratory in New Mexico, with the goal of the 30 pits per year by 2026, and achieving 50 pits a year at the Savannah River site in South Carolina in 2030. Modernizing and reestablishing capabilities required to produce, it was mentioned, the highly enriched uranium, but Y-12 does more than that. They're responsible for what we call the CAN subassemblies. They're responsible for not only the highly enriched uranium, but a lot of other materials and components in the warhead. So you saw the beautiful picture of the uranium processing facility. That is not the only modernization activity that's taking place at Y-12. There are other key modernization activities taking place at Y-12 that are essential to enabling us to continue to deliver to the military. And then we are also modernizing facilities and capabilities needed to design and produce non-nuclear components at the Kansas City National Security Campus in Missouri and the Sandia National Laboratories, both in New Mexico and California. So it really goes across that spectrum. They're all important to achieve in order to continue to meet the DoD requirements. We have our eyes focused on all of them, but certainly, we're keenly focused on reestablishing pit production. That's key. As I mentioned, some of the capabilities at Y-12 are also key. So we are focused really, hard on those areas in particular. We recognize it's a challenge. As I mentioned before, it's complicated. And that it's a challenging goal, but the weapons complex has a track record of rising to these challenges. And we are working, and all the sites are working together to make sure that we can meet these challenges. Sometimes we like to say, if not us, who? If not when? If not now, when? We are kind of, as I say, we are, in our view, in view of others that are well familiar with the field, with the field and the requirements, we are running out of time to where we will impact the deterrent if we don't respond. So it's a broad brush of the production complex, as I say, of the chart that was shown earlier. Essentially, every site is being touched in a prioritized way. It's being touched to make sure that we get to those facilities first that are just essential for delivering in the near term, and then we will return and keep working our way through the facility modernization as the ones in progress now begin to roll off. We're also looking at making sure that the stockpile, the research, technology, and engineering. We recognize that the scientific capabilities that we developed during the early part of the stewardship program up through today, they're absolutely essential to the stewardship program. It's not an overstatement to say that our science, technology, and engineering essentially underpins or informs just about every stockpile action we take. And so we also pay attention to making sure that we just don't sit back in that area as well. So as part of the modernization program, we are making sure that we're identifying gaps in capabilities that are needed to deliver the warheads to the military. And we have identified some key capabilities in this area that we also have placed in part of the modernization program. And two in particular are the delivery of our first exascale computer in 2023 to be sited at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory in California. And then the other is our enhanced capability for subcritical experiments. This is enhancing our experimental capabilities to do subcritical experiments at the Nevada National Security Site. And so we are, so again, it goes across the spectrum of not only the production facilities, but also identifying those capabilities that we need to make sure that we can certify the warheads, that we continue to assess the current stockpile and certify the warheads that we need to produce for the military. So we, and then, just to put it in context again, as I mentioned, if people aren't aware, so, our number one priority, of course, is maintaining confidence in the knowledge and the state of the active stockpile. The other is that we are doing 4 warhead acquisition programs right now. The B6112, the W88 All-370, the W80-4 LEP, and the W87-1 modification program, with the potential, if authorized and appropriated by Congress, to add a 5th, the W93 Mark 7, start in 21. And all of these programs are used and constructed around the complex that we have and the complex that we need to get to. And they also help drive the priorities of the facilities that we're modernizing. But they also then do link that if the facility modernization doesn't move forward on the timescales necessary, the potential is there to impact the timelines on these acquisition programs. So that's something that we always stay in close coordination with our Department of Defense colleagues so that they're well aware of those dependencies and we work on those together. Workforce goes without saying, none of this stuff would work without the workforce. So that is also part of our modernization strategy. We have a very large percentage of our workforce that is retirement eligible. Luckily, we find that a lot of them love what they're doing, so they're willing to stay and work to transfer their knowledge to the people that we're bringing on. Our estimates right now that for just kind of for what we need and keeping up with the potential for attrition, we're going to be needing to bring about 6,000 people a year on for the next number of years. And as I say, we're fortunate that a lot of the people that have the knowledge from the older days are willing to stay and transfer that knowledge, and that's really a benefit to the newer generation that's coming in. I think the administrator, when she talked to you, she probably talked about it because she deserves a lot of credit for this. We really reinvigorated our approach to recruitment, where we recruit not only by individual site, but we recruit by complex, where we have recruitment fairs where all of our sites are represented at the fair. And someone can go to a table for Los Alamos, and if Los Alamos recognizes that person might be a better fit for Pantex or Lawrence Livermore, they're sent over to that table. So it's being done in the context of what's good for the complex. So as I say, the administrator deserves a lot of credit for pushing the team to come up with new and innovative ways to continue recruitment, and even to continue recruitment through the COVID-19 period. We've been holding virtual recruitment fairs that are starting to show fruit. So a long way, I'll say one of the other things that we recognize is that the tyranny of the immediate can consume all the oxygen in the room. So we also do try to work to not lose sight of the future due to the pressures of the immediate. We are working we're working to guard against that. We have a number of ongoing studies to examine future advances in science, technology, and engineering that that could be both a benefit to us or a threat to us. So we continue to do that work. And then also in the production complex, you know, we do recognize that there's a renaissance in production or manufacturing capabilities that is taking place. And it may sound easier just to replicate what we had during the Cold War, but actually that doesn't always work out as well as one might think. So we are working on new technologies and new capabilities to support production. We also have to worry about the idea of bringing in someone to the production complex that looks like a machine that was developed and purchased before the person was even born. So, you know, we have to worry about the new generation that's also coming into our manufacturing complex and what they, you know, what they will learn about and what they come in with knowing how to do. So that is also part of what we're doing, is not only focusing on the potential of scientific surprises, but also working to make sure we stay abreast of what can be done in terms of modern manufacturing techniques to improve our responsiveness and resilience. So I'll conclude by just saying that, you know, clearly we take this job seriously. You know, our job is to help maintain that the stockpile is second to none. As we discussed today, I think you see that the modernization is extensive. It is complicated. It's going to require years to carry out. We fully recognize there are challenges to the current timelines, and everything, you know, everything will not go as we currently plan. That's why part of our efforts that we work so closely with the Department of Defense with is on risk mitigation, as also risk path in case things don't go as currently planned. We continue to aggressively manage these risks as they maintain the close coordination with the DoD, particularly as they modernize their delivery platforms. The warheads and the delivery platforms clearly go together, and the synchronization between those is key. So us staying on schedule and then staying on schedule is key to the success of the deterrent. And you know, I'll just say that we are a learning organization. We learn from things that we identify and things that we can do better, and we keep inserting that back into the effort. And so we, you know, as I say, we recognize it's a challenge what we're taking on, but as I mentioned, you know, we believe we're the organization that has the talent to do it. And as mentioned, the time is now. We are running out of time. We are, you know, we will start to take undue risks if we don't modernize on the timeline that we've identified. And so with that, I'll stop there, and you know, I think leaves time for some questions.
Dr. Verdon, thank you. Boy, you gave us a lot to think about, a lot of information in a short period of time. Thank you. A very, very impressive briefing. It's appreciated. I'm going to be moderating this session for a question and answer on behalf of Advanced Nuclear Weapons Alliance Deterrence Center and the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies. So appreciate everyone being here. I ask if you please use the virtual hand raising that you'll see. I think if you click on the three dots, it actually doesn't give us access to those hands, so I can't see what it looks like. I think if you click on the three dots, you can raise your hand if you have a question. Ask when you're recognized, if you please state your name and your organization. Alternatively, if you want to send me a private message or a public message in the chat function, you can ask the question there and I will read it. Again, please put your name and organization. I'm going to take, sir, though, the prerogative to ask at least a couple questions here. Interested, we're all here on Zoom primarily because of COVID-19 and how much that's changed everyone's life, I would imagine, but interested to know specifically how it's impacting NNSA and the labs and plants that you oversee, and how it's impacting it as far as from a mission point of view. Is it creating problems for meeting missions? I appreciate your response on that.
Okay, so the approach we took when this COVID started was we you know, as at headquarters sat down and we said, what are the essential things that we have to deliver on? And so clearly what came to the top was we had to work to sustain the present stockpile. So what we did was we worked with all of our sites to say, you know, you're the feet on the ground, you're the eyes and the ears on the ground. You have to use your judgment with your workforce to protect your workforce at all costs. But if you can, these are the priorities of which you have to work on. And so what we gave them was the support of the active stockpile had to be a #1 priority. So all the sites figured out what they had to do, how they could maximally telework while continuing to support the present stockpile. Then the other we did was we approached it with a phased restart of the warhead acquisition programs, the B-61, the W-88. But in all cases, we gave the sites the freedom to be the best judge of how it was going. We gave them a goal of a timeline of when to basically restart and come back up to speed in a phased manner across all the acquisition programs, but their call on how they did it and how they approached it. And, you know, to a large extent, it worked well. You know, we had certain sites that were able to work through. We had other sites that, because of local conditions, they had to do almost a complete pause. But we worked together as a team, and we found a way to mitigate the impacts of those to the highest priority deliverables. So I think what it was with, you know, we provided priority guidance from headquarters, and then we turned it over to the field to actually execute and inform on what actions they had to take. And you know, we had initially we had 2 or 3 times a week, you know, high-level meetings to get a sense of how it was going. Then going to kind of weekly meetings as things got more to steady state. So again, we're constantly monitoring it, and we're constantly, you know, counting on the sites to keep us informed of how, you know, what the impact is. And so far, knock wood, they're making it through on our highest priorities. And, you know, again, we work with them to make sure they understand the priorities. Again, we give them the freedom to, if they can bring back other work online without impacting, they're free to do that. But it's worked well. It's been a lot of work. It's been across the board, not only you know, NNSA, but big DOE has been part of it. We've been sharing lessons learned across the entire DOE complex of how we've been able to do this.
Appreciate it, and glad to hear as difficult it is in so many areas. It sounds like things are going fairly well in your space. So thank you for that, and for everyone that's making that work in this difficult time. I want to ask one more question. I'm going to turn over to the audience. House Energy and Water Appropriations markup. That's some pretty tough language for NNSA, including, as I estimate, about $2 billion in reductions in funding for FY 2021. Can you speak to what kind of impact that would have on the program if that becomes the final measure, anything close to that?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at the highest level, it will delay some of the modernization activities, the facility modernization activities in a number of key areas, and then it will impact the warhead acquisition schedules, because we are dependent on some of those capabilities to deliver those warhead acquisitions. So you know, that will, you know, so there will be an impact with some of the reductions that are there in certain particular areas.
Thanks, everybody. I'm going to get close to wrapping this thing up with a few comments, and I'm going to hand it over to Jeff here in a moment too to fully close it out. Thank you, sir. I mean, this was so much valuable information in 1 hour. It's one of the best hours I've spent in a good amount of time. I really appreciate it, and appreciate you joining us today. Jeff, let me hand it back over to you on behalf of Peter and myself.
Yes, indeed. And on behalf of the Advanced Nuclear Weapons Alliance Deterrence Center and the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, Dr. Verdon, just to repeat essentially what David just said, this was an hour well spent, and we appreciate your leadership, and best of luck as we move down this path through the budget cycle this year.